Siman Yod and the Shagas Aryeh speaks about the Zman of Yetzias Mitzrayim of the day. The truth is we're going to do both Siman Yod and Siman Yod Aleph tonight. I hope should have time for both. They are both quite small, and really Yod Aleph is a continuation of Yod. So the Zman for Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim of the day, the Shagas Aryeh holds, as we saw before, he made reference to this idea that it's the entire day, from Alus HaShachar until Tzeis HaKochavim. It's not going to be dependent on the Zman of Kriya Shema Shel Shachris, which is the Zman of Uv Kumecha. We saw that the Zman for Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim is Kol Yemei Chayecha, so therefore it's a daytime mitzvah. There's a different time slot than the time for Kriya Shema, as we spoke about before. Now the truth is, even though we did see that there were those that disagreed about the Zman of Yetzias Mitzrayim of the evening, it doesn't seem that I did not see anyone disagree with the Shagas Aryeh on this point, that the Zman of Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim of the day is the entire day, right? We saw that Rabbeinu Yonah, he held that at nighttime, he was a little bit more makel, because it doesn't actually say the word night in the Torah, but it does actually say the word day for Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim. So therefore, I don't see that there would be anyone that would disagree with the Shagas Aryeh on this point. Just something interesting, not discussed in the Shagas Aryeh, is that something that comes out very interesting is were Yotzei this din of Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim either by the third paragraph of Kriya Shema or the bracha of Emes V'Yatziv, right? That we discussed previously. The Zman of Kriya Shema is only until 3 hours. The Zman of the brachos is only until 4 hours, according to most poskim. There are poskim that do say it's the entire day. According to most poskim, it's only until 4 hours. The same Zman as Zman Tefillah. So it turns out that after the 4th hour is over, so you're no longer saying Kriya Shema, you're no longer saying Emes V'Yatziv, but you still have a chiyuv to say Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim. So even though you're not going to do it with Kriya Shema, you're not going to do it with the bracha of Emes V'Yatziv, you still have a chiyuv. So it just turns out something very interesting, and which does come up l'maisa in very rare circumstances. If a person would, completely miss Shachris, some sort of onus slept all the way through Zman Tefillah, he would still have to do this mitzvah of Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim, even though he wouldn't do it in the normal way of Shema or the bracha of Emes V'Yatziv, or if a person is lo alinu and oning, right, in the burials after the time of Shachris, which I'm sure happens, plenty of times. So then he would still have a chiyuv to mention Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim, even though he's not going to say Kriya Shema, he's not going to say Emes V'Yatziv. Why? Because the Zman is the whole day for Zechias Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the way Chazal are masaking to be Yotzi the mitzvah, only applies during the morning, even though really the mitzvah is the whole day. It comes out a very, very unusual sort of thing. So the way Chazal made it is almost in a way where the person would be mistaken into thinking that he doesn't have the mitzvah anymore. But because he doesn't say Kriya Shema, he doesn't say Emes V'Yatziv. So what is he going to say? I don't know. I guess I have to say that nusach they had in the Gemara. We saw that for the person that doesn't say Emes V'Emunah at night. We had a special nusach for that we saw in one of the previous shows. Anyway, that's just a side point. The Shagas Aryeh doesn't discuss it. I just thought it was something very interesting. I think the average person probably wouldn't realize. If they missed Shachris, they would think, okay, so I'm finished. So I missed Shachris, I'll daven 2 minchas. You realize there's a whole other mitzvah that you're not going to be yotzei. Okay, so the Gemara in Barachos Daf Gimel Beis, which is the first Mara Makom, says as follows: Tana Rabbanon, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Zu Kriya Shema Shel Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. I think we saw this, many of the Gemaras we see over and over again. The Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi would only say the first pasuk, or according to Rabbeinu Yonah, it means the first parak of Kriya Shema, but not more, because he was in the middle of a shir. Amar le Rav le Rav Chia, Lo Chazina le Rebbe demekabel le Malchus Shemayim. Rav said to Rav Chia, he didn't even see Rebbe do that. Amar le, and he said to him, Bar Pachti, B'shah shemavir yadav al panav mekabel of ol Malchus Shemayim. So when he's putting his hand on his face, that's when he's doing it. So you didn't notice that's what he's doing, but that is what he's doing. And then the Gemara wants to know, Choser v'gomra o ino choser v'gomra? Does he finish Kriya Shema after the shir is over. Now it seems like the shir is until after the Zman of Kriya Shema. He's Yotze his D'Oraisa din with the first paragraph. And the question is, though, when he's finished, does he say the rest of Kriya Shema even though it's past the Zman? Bar Kapara Omer Einu Chozer Gomer, Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe Omer Chozer Gomer. So Bar Kapara says he doesn't, and Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe says that he does. Amrli Bar Kapara Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe. So Bar Kapara said to Rabbi Shimon the son of Rebbe, Bishal Medida Mina Einu Chozer Gomer, Hainu de Bahadar Rebbe Ashmait Sadis Beitzias Mitzrayim. According to me, that he doesn't say it later. That's why he always says in the shir something that has to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim, because he wants to be Yotzei that mitzvah. Elididach, but according to you, Damarta Chozer Gomer, that he's going to say it later anyway. Lama leila hadurei kedei lahaskir Yetzias Mitzrayim bizmana. The reason, Lama leila hadurei ? Why would he try to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim during the shir? And the Gemara answers, kedei lahaskir Yetzias Mitzrayim bizmana, because he wants to say it in its proper time. So from this Gemara, we actually see two conflicting ideas. On the one hand, it's a little bit mashma that the Zman of Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim is the same as the Zman of Kriya Shema. Because we said Rebbe would try to make sure to mention Kriya Shema during the shir in order to be Yotzei in the Zman, Bizmana, in its proper time. Which implies that after the shir would not be the proper time anymore. However, the Shaggart points out it's impossible to explain that way. Because Bar Kapara was asking Rav Shimon bar Rebbe that according to you that he's going to say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema afterwards, which is after the Zman of Kriya Shema, so then there should be no reason for him to say Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim during the shir. Right, so we see from Bar Kapara's question that he understood that the Zman of Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim extends past the Zman of Kriya Shema. And the Gemara doesn't seem to answer that Bar Kapara is for sure wrong because you can't be Yotzei then. It says no, seems like he also wants to do it during the shir, to say Kriya Shema Bizmana. The Shaggart says, doesn't mean that there's a Zman for Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's just L'chachila, he wants to say Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim during the Zman of Kriya Shema, which is in fact exactly what Rashi says. Rashi says, we have it on the Ma'ar Makom sheet, Bizmana means Bizman Kriya Shema. He doesn't want to say the Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim at the Zman of Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim, because that he could do even afterwards. Because the Zman is really the whole day. He wants to do it at the Zman of Kriya Shema. Now, why would he want to do that? It doesn't really explain the Shagas Aryeh, but I think the idea would be, we see that Chazal were masaking, that the way you're Yotzei this mitzvah, even though you have the whole day to do it, is to do it with Kriya Shema. Right? That was the funny thing we pointed out before, is that they tied it to Kriya Shema, even though the Zman is different. So they want you to do it with Kriya Shema, maybe because they don't want you to wait until the last minute, they want you to do it early in the morning, or for whatever other reason. Maybe it has some sort of connection in the ideology of it to Kriya Shema. So therefore they want you to do it at that time. But that's not the time for Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim. The time really extends, at least on a D'Oraisa level, the entire day. That's what the Shaggart wants to show from that Gemara. Now, the rest of this year is basically going to be explaining a difficult Gemara, which we already saw once, but now we'll discuss it a little bit in more detail. And basically the reason why the Shaggart is bringing this Gemara is because this Yesod that he's saying about saying Kriya Shema, saying Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim the entire day, actually paves the way for a new pshat in this Gemara that the Shaggart wants to explain. So the Gemara is on Brachos Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, which is Os Beis in the Ma'ar Makomos, and it says Amar of Yehuda, Safek Kara Kriya Shema, Safek Lo Kara, Eino Chozer V'Karei. So Yehuda, and remember we saw in the first year of the Shaggart, if you can remember that long ago, that it's really Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that if you have a Safek whether you said Kriya Shema or not, you don't have to say it again because Shmuel holds that Kriya Shema is only a D'Rabbanan. That was the discussion we spoke about in the beginning of the Sefer. Safek Amar Emes V'Yatziv, Safek Lo Amar. If he has a Safek whether he said Emes V'Yatziv or not, then Chozer V'Omer Emes V'Yatziv, he has to say it again. My time, why? Kriya Shema D'Rabbanan, Emes V'Yatziv D'Oraisa. Kriya Shema is only D'Rabbanan, like we said, but Emes V'Yatziv is a D'Oraisa of Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim. Okay, so there are three explanations of the Gemara, which is based on a major stira between this Gemara and another Gemara, and it will be discussed in Tosfos what the question is, and two answers we're going to see in Tosfos, then we're going to see the Shagas Aryeh has a third way of explaining the Gemara. So Tosfos starts off, Safik lo amar misviyatziv, chozer, v'tema. It's a wonder. Ha'al karchach tzarech lomar shu mesupuk gam mikriya shema. It has to be that he also doesn't know if he said shema. Shim hayabar lo mikriya shema, the safik emes v'yatziv. If he knows he for sure said shema, and he only has a safik whether he says emes v'yatziv, lo yiyem in haTorah, it wouldn't be midaraisa anymore. Kevin shehizkir yitzias mitzrayim b'kriya shema, because he mentioned yitzias mitzrayim b'kriya shema. V'imkein, if that would be true, hol mesupik mishnehem. If he, alright, so that's the first point. Tosfos is proving. First assumption is that it has to be talking about a case he for sure did not say Shema, or not for sure. He has a suffix whether he said Shema also. If he for sure did say Shema, so then the suffix of emes v'yatziv is not a suffix d'oraisa, because you're yotze the d'oraisa with the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, as we've spoken about before. The imkain hol mesufik mishnehem yasser l'Kriya Shema. The question is though, if he has a suffix about both, then really he should say Shema. This be tarti, because it has two things in Kriya Shema, even though Shmuel holds Kriya Shema is not d'oraisa, but it is d'oraisa mitzad the Zechir Sitzias Mitzrayim, plus it has an extra maila that it has Malchus Shemayim, the Yitzias Mitzrayim, and Yitzias Mitzrayim. Dahachi adif milomer emes v'yatziv, and that would be better than saying emes v'yatziv, the lek el achada. You only have that one mitzvah d'oraisa of Yitzias Mitzrayim. Kidam Rasam Makabe Masnisan. We're going to see this also in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, which we saw in previous shiurim, I think a few times, was about the Baal Keri. The Baal Keri, according to the sheet of the Gemara, that cannot say Kriya Shema out loud, so he's going to think Kriya Shema in his head, and we said he should think Kriya Shema, but not the brachos. Now, he has to be yotze his Zechir Sitzias Mitzrayim through thinking, according to the Shita that thinking is being yotze. We saw the two opinions in the Gemara how to explain that Mishnah. So he's trying to be yotze, or at least be yotze the inyan of Zechir Sitzias Mitzrayim. And we say if he has to pick between Shema and emes v'yatziv, so it's better to say Shema. And the Gemara explains because Shema has two things. It has the Kabbalah's Malchus Shemayim, and it has the Yitzias Mitzrayim. So here also where I have a suffix, and I'm going to have to say one of the two, I should also pick Shema. How come Shmuel is saying to do emes v'yatziv? So that's the major question that we have, and we're going to have three mahalchim how to explain it. So the first is the Shita of the Ri. We'll discuss each Shita separately. We'll do the Shita of the Ri, and then we'll see the Shita of Rabbi Shimon, Baal Tosfos, and then we'll see the Shagas Aryeh. So Vomer Ri, the Ri explains, Dividing Masnis and Gabi Baal Keri, Sheyadanu bo shlo amar Kriya Shema v'lo mes v'yatziv klal. The case of the Baal Keri, we know he hasn't said anything. He's not a suffix. He's now coming lichachil in the morning without saying anything, and he wants to know what's better to say or to think. Vanu rotzen lahatrilo, we want to matter him something. Hilkach tohu yoser shomer Kriya Shema, better to say Shema. Dikatarti, because it has these two things. Avohacha, but in our case, shu suffix imamar emes v'yatziv u'misafkale imamar shnehem kidabrishis. Right, he has a suffix both about the emes v'yatziv and about the Kriya Shema. Tohu yoser shomer emes v'yatziv milmar Kriya Shema. It's better to say emes v'yatziv. Why? He has a better chance of getting everything 100% right by saying emes v'yatziv. It's just statistically the more proper choice. Why? Because the im kara kvar emes v'yatziv, gam kara kriya shema kvar. If he did say emes v'yatziv, then he for sure also said shema. Right? He doesn't know what he did. But if he said emes v'yatziv, he didn't just say emes v'yatziv by itself. He obviously said shema first. Because it would make sense he would be going in the order of davening. He just doesn't know what point he got up to. Kriya shema v'achach emes v'yatziv. V'yotzi de shtehen, and then he was yotzi both. That's one possibility. V'china mitema delo amar kvar shtehen, and if he didn't say either one of them, mikol makom shem amar kriya shema V'lo omer emes v'yatziv. There's a possibility he said Shema and then didn't say emes v'yatziv. Shezeh yachol lios. That's a possibility. Va'ach, and then now, kishayomer emes v'yatziv, when he says emes v'yatziv, nimsa shehishlim hakol. So he's fixed everything up. V'chitim, and even if you're going to say Shem lo kar lo zev lo zev, maybe he didn't say anything. Came a desfeiku, since it's a suffix, kule haylo trechu rabbanan laser shneim. Chazal didn't make you say both. Aval yomer kriya shema, but if you say kriya shema, ein zu takana gemura kol kach, it's not a complete fixing. The shema kara kriya shema acheres, maybe you already said shema, v'lo yatsa klal b'masho satam, he's not doing anything now, because he already said what he's saying now. V'imbar shalom kara kriya shema, and if he knows he didn't say shema, im kain lomar nami emes v'yatziv, then he also didn't say emes v'yatziv. Sheim regilas lomar emes v'yatziv lo kriya shema, because it's not, you don't usually say emes v'yatziv without shema. V'im kain, and therefore, kishomer mi'ata kriya shema, when you say shema now, lo tikin klal, you didn't really fix it up, v'lo yatziv v'nisveiko, and you didn't get out of your suffix. Okay, so this tells us a little bit wordy, but basically what he's saying is that the reason why in the case of a suffix emes v'yatziv is better is because there is a possibility, right? There's really three possibilities. Either he didn't say anything, he said Shema but not emes v'yatziv, or he said them both already. Those are the three possibilities. If he says emes v'yatziv, according to 1/3 of the possibilities, he is now doing things exactly the way he should be doing them. He said Kriya Shema already, and now he's saying emes v'yatziv. You don't have that by just saying Kriya Shema, because in either of the three situations is not going to be exactly the way you're supposed to do it. If he said nothing, so he's going to say Shema, but he's going to not have emes v'yatziv. If he already said Shema and not emes v'yatziv, so he's saying Shema again, but he's not going to have emes v'yatziv. If he already said both of them, so he doesn't need to say anything. He's just saying Shema. Right, so it's true you take care of your suffix deraisa with Shema. Right? I mean, it's a little bit confusing. The last words of Tosfos, Li Yatsi B'Di Speak, you didn't take care of your suffix. You did take care of your suffix, and it was your Yotze, your suffix deraisa. But you don't have that maila of possibly doing things 100% the right way. When you say emes v'yatziv, you have that possibility. So it's just a statistically better choice to pick emes v'yatziv in this specific situation where you're not sure what you said. But it's true, if you know you didn't say anything and you have to pick one, you'd pick Shema. So that answers the stira. That's the way Tosfos explained in Gemara. So the Shagas Aryeh has two questions on the explanation of the Ri. His first question is that if it's true that the Gemara is talking about a case where he has a suffix about Shema and emes v'yatziv, he doesn't know if he said both of them, right? So Tosfos says you have to explain it. If so, then the wording of the Gemara on Daf Chaf Aleph is a little bit not precise, because it says first, if he has a suffix he says Shema, he doesn't say Shema. If he has a suffix he says emes v'yatziv, then he does say emes v'yatziv. According to Tosfos, you really should say, if a person has a suffix, whether he said Shema and emes v'yatziv, he does not say Shema and he does say emes v'yatziv. Should have put it all together in one case, because according to the Ri, it fits together in one case. Why did Shmuel split it up into two cases? There's the case of forgetting Shema, suffix of Shema, and it seems like a separate case of a suffix of emes v'yatziv. But if the case of emes v'yatziv is only in a case where it's also a suffix of Shema, so put it together, suffix Shema and emes v'yatziv, so then I'll tell you, you don't have to say Shema, you have to say emes v'yatziv. That's one question. The other question is that according to the Ri, why is it that you say emes v'yatziv and you don't say Kriya Shema? It's not really like the way the Gemara says it, right? The Gemara said the reason is because Kriya Shema is d'Rabbanan and emes v'yatziv is d'Oraisa. That's not really the reason. Really, either one of them you'd be Yotzei or Chi of d'Oraisa, right? It's a suffix d'Oraisa, and therefore I have to say one of the two. And we're choosing emes v'yatziv not because it's d'Oraisa more than Shema, just because it has that possibility of, in one of the cases, I'll have done everything 100% l'chachila. That's the reason why I say emes v'yatziv, not because it's d'Oraisa, because I can be Yotzei myself with d'Oraisa also with saying Kriya Shema. So the reason that the Gemara gives is not exactly the way it comes out according to the Ri. So those are two questions that Shagas Aryeh asked on the Ri, and therefore, of course, he's going to pave room for his own interpretation, which he wouldn't have to do if Tosfos' interpretations were perfectly good and he had no question against them, so then he'd go with that, but he has his own interpretation. Okay. So, before we get to the Shagas Arya's explanation, we're going to see the second explanation in Tosos, which I put in like a separate section on the Maram Makoma sheets. Od Amar Rabbi Shimon gives a different explanation. Demairi Shapir She'enu Masupuk Ela Mi'emes V'yatziv. It's talking about a case the suffix is only on Emes V'yatziv, Aval Baruhu Shakar Kriya Shema, but he for sure did say Shema. Alright, so this already takes care of the Shagas Arya's questions on the first explanation of Tosos. Nevertheless, Emes V'yatziv is still D'Oraisa. Sheratza Lomar Safik Lomar Emes V'yatziv im Parashas Tzitzis, because when it says Emes V'yatziv, it includes the Parasha of Tzitzis. Shemasupaki Lo Amar Lo Parashas Tzitzis V'Lo Emes V'yatziv. He didn't say either of them. Possibly, he doesn't know. Vim Kain, and if so, Lo Hisker Klal Yitzias Mitzrayim. He didn't mention Yitzias Mitzrayim at all. That's why Yitzias Mitzrayim is still D'Oraisa. V'chula Milsid Yitzias Mitzrayim Karli Emes V'yatziv. The whole Indian of Yitzias Mitzrayim, which includes the third paragraph of Kriya Shema and the Bracha of Emes V'yatziv, we call it Emes V'yatziv. Lefi de term Emes V'yatziv having Mishum Yitzias Mitzrayim, since the reason why we say Emes V'yatziv is because of Yitzias Mitzrayim, V'hilchach havi Parshas Tzitzis b'chlal Emes V'yatziv. Therefore, the Parsha of Tzitzis goes together with it. Right? So not like the Reed that says we don't know if he said anything of Kriya Shema. No, we know he said the first two paragraphs of Kriya Shema. After that, he doesn't know what he did. And we call that suffix a suffix on Emes V'yatziv. So, the Tosfos leaves us a little bit vague on what the psak is, therefore. Right, so now we know he doesn't know that he said both Vayomer and Emes V'yatziv, so now the Gemara says so he has to say Emes V'yatziv. What does the Gemara mean when it says you have to say Emes V'yatziv? Does it mean he just says Vayomer? Doesn't seem to make sense as a Shagas Arya, because why would it call just Vayomer Emes V'yatziv? Right? And as it says, the lashon of the Gemara was Choser v'omer Emes V'yatziv. You have to say now Emes V'yatziv. So what are you saying exactly? If you're only saying the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, it doesn't make sense the Gemara would call that say Emes V'yatziv. Okay, so we're going to knock out that possibility. If it means you just say Emes V'yatziv, and you don't say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, so then we go back to our original question of why? Why don't you just say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema? You could also be Yotzer D'Oraisa with that. And if what he means is you could choose to say whichever one you want, right, either Emes V'yatziv or Vayomer, so he is bothered by the fact that to say Emes V'yatziv, even to say that you have the choice, it's difficult to say that when the Gemara says to say Emes V'yatziv, it means you could, if you want, say just Vayomer and not Emes V'yatziv. Or if you want, you can say Emes V'yatziv. It wouldn't call that Emes V'yatziv in such a situation. Another difficulty with all of these three explanations, says the Shagas Arya, is that it doesn't match up the language with the beginning of the statement. Right? The statement was, he has a suffix whether you said Emes V'yatziv. What do we say that meant? That meant both Vayomer and Emes V'yatziv. So what does he do? He has to say Emes V'yatziv to match it up with the beginning of this sentence. To have the words mean the same thing, it would mean both. I mean, you have to say both. So let's say maybe it means, right, here's a fourth possibility of what the psak would be, is that you have to say both. You have to say Vayomer and Emes V'yatziv. But he doesn't like that at all, because once you say, and the truth is, so I saw they quoted in the footnotes in the Shagas Arya, that in fact the Shiltei Giborim and the Bach and the Magen Avram, they all paskin this way, that they understand the explanation of Tosos means that you have to say both. Because you have to say Vayomer and Emes V'yatziv in a case of a suffix. But this is difficult, because if you said Vayomer, then why do I have to say Emes V'yatziv? Because to be Yotzer Ma'achiv D'Oraisa, I only need to say one of the two. Once I say one of the two, the other one's only suffix D'Rabbanan, because I may have said it already. Since it's only suffix D'Rabbanan, I shouldn't have to say it. So therefore, it doesn't make sense that I have to say both of them. Maybe you could say that they go together. The reason I have to say both of them is because I can't say Vayomer without Emes V'yatziv. It's one joint tefillah to be Yotzei the Chiyuv Yitzias Mitzrayim, because we're sacking them together. So I don't say one without the other. If I have to say Vayomer, maybe I also have to say Emes V'Yatziv with it. Maybe we could say that. So the Shagas Aryeh says it doesn't make sense, because this is going back to something that he spoke about earlier. So Shagas Aryeh holds that the real reason why they're Masakin Vayomer is for Parshas Tzitzis. And the reason they were Masakin Emes V'Yatziv was to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Zechir Sisias Mitzrayim. So it doesn't make sense that it becomes one unit, because they weren't Masakin for the same reason. And this we even proved in one of the, I don't know if it was the previous year or the year before, I think it was the previous year actually, right? We proved that from the fact that in the evening, it seems that there is no chiyuv specifically to say Vayomer, the third paragraph of Kriya Shema. Our meaning is to do so based on all the factors that were discussed in the Gemara there. But you don't have to, you could just say Emes V'Emunah. They're not attached together. Right, we said not exactly Emes V'Emunah, that lashon exactly would have to be attached to Vayomer, but the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not, you could have a nusach that includes what's said in Emes V'Yatziv without saying Vayomer at all. Another question is that if in fact they do go together, they're one unit, why would the Gemara call it Emes V'Yatziv? We should call it Vayomer, because firstly those are psukim from the Torah, so that would seem to be the main part of that takana if it would be all one unit. And plus it's first, right? So why would we call that unit Emes V'Yatziv? We should call that unit Vayomer. Another question that the Shagas Aryeh asks against this mahalach is, in a situation where we know he said the first two paragraphs of Kriya Shema, and we have a suffix about the third paragraph, he really would have to say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema regardless of the din of Zechir Sisias Mitzrayim. Regardless of the suffix Yeraisi, you should have to say the third paragraph. And why is that? And this is something we also spoke about before, and we'll see it again in the Gemara. I think we saw it when we spoke about it earlier also in Os Gimel in the Mara Makomos. The idea that when you start saying Kriya Shema, you have to make sure that you finish it properly. Right? Even if you don't have any specific suffix Yeraisa reason why I have to go back and say it, but the fact that I started saying it compels me to say it properly. And this is, we saw in the Gemara on Tazayin Amud Aleph, Kara v'ta'a ve'en yodei lehechan ta'a, that a person that's saying Kriya Shema and he makes a mistake and he doesn't know where he is in Kriya Shema, ve'emsa parak yashtarosh, if he's in the middle of a parak, he goes back to the beginning. Ve'em parak leparak yashtar parak rishon, if he's in between paragraphs, he has to go back to the first one. Ve'em ksiva l'ksiva yashtar l'ksiva rishona, he's holding by one of the ksivas, but he doesn't know which one, he has to go back to the first one. Amrli Rav Yochanan says, Lo shanu el shel pasach v'leman yirbu yimechem, that's only if you didn't start leman yirbu, aval pasach v'leman yirbu yimechem, sirchi nakavasi. If I start leman yirbu, so then I know I already said the second paragraph of Kriya Shema. And what we saw from here was, according to the Shita of the Shagas Aryeh and Rabbeinu Yonah, and the Shagas Aryeh was bringing proofs to the Shita, that only the first paragraph of Kriya Shema is Yeraisa, and the second paragraph is only Derabanan. So if I have a suffix and I don't know if I'm supposed to now say the second paragraph of Kriya Shema, so we would, based on the rules, we would say suffix Derabanan L'Kula, but that's not what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying you always have to go back and say that second paragraph properly. So this is where we discussed this idea that if you started saying Kriya Shema and then you have a suffix in the middle, so you don't go with the rules of suffix Derabanan L'Kula, rather you have to complete Kriya Shema properly. So the same thing would apply. If I had our case, the case that Tosa set up, that I for sure said the first two paragraphs of Kriya Shema, then I had a suffix if I said the third, of course you have to say the third paragraph, regardless of the din of Zechir Sisias Mitzrayim, which is not what the Gemara said. Right? So that's why he does not like this explanation of Tosfos. Now, he says also, he brings the Rashi, you can see this Rashi, Sirchi Nakat. Now Sirchi Nakat, the way we explained in the Gemara was that if I'm holding by Laman Yirbu, so then I know for sure I said the second paragraph of Kriya Shema. I think that's the Pashtus, but Rashi has a different explanation on the Gemara. And he says, Ein litos mikan at Emes V'Yatziv. You don't have to be concerned that he made a mistake from here until Emes V'Yatziv. Vein sarach lachzer el Emes. He only has to go back to Emes, Shaparsha Shagur B'Fiv, because the Parsha Vayomer is so fluent in the person's mouth I guess the reason why it's more fluent is just because it doesn't have confusing statements which get you confused between the two paragraphs. Now, you don't say it any more than you say the first two paragraphs of Kriya Shema, but it's just easier to say because the first two paragraphs are sometimes, you can get them confused, as opposed to the third paragraph. So once you start L'man Yirbu, so then if your mind went on autopilot, so then we know you did it right. That's what Rashi is saying. So what does the Shagas Arya want to bring from this Rashi? Is that we see that without this Sirchei Nakat reason, Rashi would understand that if I would have a suffix in the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, then I would have to say it over. Right? Because once you start saying Kriya Shema, so you have to finish it. Another thing I find interesting from Rashi, which it's interesting the Shagas Arya did not point out, is that it would seem that Rashi holds that there is no possible case of what Tosfos was discussing. Tosfos is talking about a case of a person that said the first two paragraphs, and he doesn't know if he said the third paragraph. According to Rashi, no such thing. If you said the first two, and you said L'man Yirbu, then he's finished. Right, so that's seems to be another disproof. I don't know if it's a disproof, because Rashi doesn't have to necessarily explain the same way as Tosfos, so doesn't have to agree with Rashi. But I guess we see from Rashi at least this concept that Shagas Arya is saying of that you do have to finish the whole Kriya Shema properly. The only reason why Rashi gives you any special dispensation is because you did finish it properly. But if you didn't, then you would have to go back. And therefore, since the Shagas Arya is left with questions against the two explanations of Tosfos, the Shagas Arya gives his own explanation on the Gemara, which is actually very fascinating. And it's based on this concept that the Shagas Arya said, is that the Zmanim for Kriya Shema and the Zmanim for Zechir Sisiyas Mitzrayim are not the same. And the beginning of the words of Shmuel is the first case that Shmuel said, where I have a suffix about Kriya Shema. It means I have a suffix about Kriya Shema, but I don't have a suffix about Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it's only the Zman of Kriya Shema, and it's not the Zman of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that would be in a situation of Kriya Shema Shel Arvis, the nighttime Kriya Shema, where you have, at least on a Shasad Chak level, you can say it all the way until Netzach Hama. The day really starts at Alos, but we said since some people are still sleeping, you say Kriya Shema all the way until Netz, even Kriya Shema Shel Arvis. But you can't say Zechir Sisiyas Mitzrayim past Alos. So we're talking about a person that it's after Alos now, and he now realizes he maybe never said Kriya Shema. Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim is not a discussion because he missed it. Right? If he didn't say it, he can't say it now. So it's only a question about Shema. That's the first statement of Shmuel. So in the case where I only have a question of Shema, so then I don't have to say it, because according to Shmuel, Safek Kriya Shema only Durabanan, and therefore it's a Safek Durabanan L'Kula. That's the first statement of Shmuel. The second statement of Shmuel is I have a Safek of Emes V'Yatziv, but there's no discussion about Shema because it's not a Zman of Kriya Shema. And that would be talking about Kriya Shema Shel Shachris. It's after 3 hours. Therefore, whether I said Kriya Shema or not doesn't make a difference at all, because I can't do it anyway at this point. But my suffix of whether I said Emes V'Yatziv, that's a suffix because it's still the Zman of Zechir Sisiyas Mitzrayim. And in that case, Shmuel says you do have to go back and say Emes V'Yatziv because it is still the Zman, because it's a suffix D'Oraisa. And he brings a diuk that this is what it's talking about, because Shmuel says that I have a suffix of Emes V'Yatziv. We know that the bracha at night is Emes V'Emunah. Right, so there's a mitzvah at night and there's a mitzvah during the day. Why did Shmuel specifically pick the Emes V'Yatziv suffix of the day? Why didn't he pick the Emes V'Yatziv suffix of the Emes V'Emunah suffix of the night? Should be the same thing. According to Shagas Arya, it's not, because Shmuel is looking for a case where I only have a chiyuv of Yetzias Mitzrayim and I don't have a chiyuv of Kriya Shema. That doesn't exist in the evening, because in the evening Kriya Shema is from the beginning, or maybe even before the beginning of night, according to some Shitas, until even after the night is over. So therefore, the Zman of Kriya Shema eclipses the entire Zman of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So there is no case where I have only a suffix of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's why Shmuel is forced to talk about Emes V'Yatziv, which is only during the day, because that's the only case where there's a Zman that he has the Chiyuv of Zechir Sisiyas Mitzrayim, but it's no longer the Zman of Kriya Shema. And now, according to this, we have no question from the Balkari, Because the Balkari, we're talking about a case where he's in the morning, and it's in the Zman Chiyuv of both of them. If a person has a Zman, is in the Zman Chiyuv of both Kriya Shema and Emes V'Yatziv, so then the Mishnah says it's preferable for him to say Kriya Shema, because it has two things, Zechir Siyis Mitzrayim and Ol Malchus Shemayim. But if we're outside of the Zman of Ol Malchus Shemayim, right, so then it's just Zechir Siyis Mitzrayim, so then in Hanami, he would say Emes V'Yatziv. Emes V'Yatziv would be preferable. I don't have written down why, and I don't remember if he said why, but I would assume the reason why it's preferable is based on the Shagas Aryeh's Shita from last week, which is the main takana for Zechir Siyis Mitzrayim is the bracha of Emes V'Yatziv. The main takana of Vayomer is really for tzitzis, and therefore, if the only issue I have to deal with is Zechir Siyis Mitzrayim, and there's no other issues that are being dealt with because the Zman Kriya Shema is over, so then I would do it with the Iker takana of Emes V'Yatziv, and not with the Vayomer, even though I could be able to with Vayomer, but that wasn't the Iker takana. And therefore, it comes out a major halachic nafkamina, that if it is the time of Kriya Shema, and a person has a suffix whether he said Kriya Shema and Emes V'Yatziv, so according to Tosfos, he would say Emes V'Yatziv. Right? That's why Tosfos explained the Gemara. According to Shagas Aryeh, no, in the Zman of Kriya Shema you say Shema. It's only after the Zman of Kriya Shema if you have the suffix you say Emes V'Yatziv. It comes out a major nafkamina. And this is majorly discussed in the poskim. Right? Most poskim bring the words of Tosfos. Right? Generally, you think if you have the Shagas Aryeh, it's nice that he feels that he could disagree with Tosfos. But right, the poskim are gonna take the standard approach with Tosfos. Only most poskim paskin. But what's interesting is the Mishnah Berurah, from what I have written in my notes, I didn't look it up inside again. But the Mishnah Berurah in the Be'er Halacha and Siman Samach Zayin actually paskins like the Shagas Aryeh against Tosfos. Right, so not only does the Shagas Aryeh feel comfortable arguing with Tosfos, but his arguments are apparently convincing enough that the Mishnah Berurah would paskins that way. That if a person would have a suffix, whether he said Shema and Emes V'Yatziv, and it's during the Zman of Kriya Shema, then he says Shema, not Emes V'Yatziv, like the Shagas Aryeh. And the whole Gemara which says Emes V'Yatziv is only talking about a different case, only where it's after the Zman of Kriya Shema. Okay, so that is officially the end of Siman Yud. And we're going to flow straight into Siman Yud Aleph, which is really just the Shagas Aryeh gives some Piskei Dinim and discusses the halachas of different cases of Sveikos, and we're going to basically apply what we learn in Siman Yud to specific cases that he speaks about in Siman Yud Aleph. And there's no additional minor poems for Siman Yud Aleph. It's just based on all the stories that we said in Siman Yud. So, in a case where a person has a suffix, whether you said Kriya Shema and all of the brachos. So what we said in Siman Yud, it sounded like we came out that you say only Emes V'Yatziv. So if it's the Zman of Kriya Shema, so you say Shema and not Emes V'Yatziv. And if it's after the Zman, so you say just Emes V'Yatziv. But he says the halacha, that whole Gemara, what's a little bit, would throw you off, that whole Gemara was according to the Shita of Shmuel. That whole Kriya Shema is D'Rabbanan. The Shagas Aryeh paskind from Siman Aleph that Kriya Shema is D'Oraisa, not like Shmuel, like Shitas Rabbi Elazar. And therefore, if a person has a suffix where they said Kriya Shema, that itself is a suffix D'Oraisa, and he certainly has to go back and say Kriya Shema. The Shagas Aryeh points out, and he brings from Rabbeinu Yonah, that when a person has a suffix, whether they did a mitzvah D'Oraisa, and they have to go back and do that mitzvah, so they say the brachos for the mitzvah also. Or even though we would generally say suffix brachos lahakal, it's only if I have a suffix on only the bracha. But if I have a suffix, if I did the mitzvah at all, and the psak is that I do have to do the mitzvah, I'm chayiv to do the mitzvah, because it's a suffix D'Oraisa, so then I make the brachos of the mitzvah as well. And therefore, in a situation where he has a suffix where he said Kriya Shema, so he says Kriya Shema again with the brachos. That ends up being the psak, because we paskin that's a suffix D'Oraisa. And that is the psak of the Rambam as well. So he brings, the Rambam clearly says that as well. Just a ha'ara that I'm thinking now is it's not so clear that the brachos of Kriya Shema are a birchas ha-mitzvah exactly. We saw, I don't remember exactly which siman, but we saw a Rashba in the Shagas Aryeh brought and I think Shaag's Aryeh in that specific Siman, I don't remember exactly which one offhand, but he actually went with the Rashba. There were like many explanations to explain a certain question, and one of them was the Rashba, and he went with the Rashba on that one, is that the brachas of Kriya Shema are not really berachas ha-mitzvah. And it's not like you're making a bracha on a shofar, or a bracha on a lulav, a bracha on tzitzis. It's connected somehow. Chazal connected it around, they were masaking it around Kriya Shema, but it's not really a berachas ha-mitzvah that when I say Shema, I'm supposed to make a bracha on the Shema. And if I don't make a bracha on the Shema, it's like I did the mitzvah of Shema incomplete because I didn't make the bracha on it. There's no real bracha for Kriya Shema. It's just brachos that Chazal put around Kriya Shema. So if I would have a suffix that maybe I said those brachos already, I could definitely hear an argument against the Rambam and against the Shaag's Aryeh that, no, you say Kriya Shema again, but you can't say the brachos because it's not a berachas mitzvah, and I may have already said them. They're only d'Rabbanan. And so to make another bracha in the case of a suffix d'Rabbanan would be difficult. So that's one hara. In a situation where you said the first two parashiyos and you have a suffix on the third parasha of Vayomer. So according to Tosos we saw, the second explanation of Tosos, Rabbi Shimon, he explained that is the case of the Gemara. That you have the suffix on both of those, on the Vayomer and the Emes V'Yatziv, and therefore you have to go back and say, it wasn't clear from Tosos, but we said that all the poskim explain means you say both of them. You say Vayomer and Emes V'Yatziv. That's the way the Bach paskind, which was in accordance to the second explanation in Tosos. However, the Shaag's Aryeh disagreed, we saw, and he says you don't have to say both of them. You only have to say one. So now which one do you say? Shaag's Aryeh says it makes a difference whether it's during the day or in the evening. If it's during the day, then it's better for me to say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema Vayomer, because it has both Parshas Tzitzis and Yetzias Mitzrayim. If I say Emes V'Yatziv, I'm only going to have Yetzias Mitzrayim. So, and plus, based on what the Shaag's Aryeh said before, is I have this chiyuv of finishing Kriya Shema properly. If I know I started Kriya Shema and I don't know if I finished it properly, so regardless of any sveikos, d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan, I have to finish Kriya Shema properly. So I have to say Parshas Vayomer. Once I say Vayomer, so Emes V'Yatziv becomes a suffix d'Rabbanan, and I don't have to say Emes V'Yatziv. That's the explanation of Shaag's Aryeh. We don't have that same svar you said before, that when I have a suffix d'oraisa, then I have to make the brachos also, because I'm not saying Vayomer because of that, of the suffix d'oraisa of Kriya Shema. I'm only saying it because I need to finish off Kriya Shema properly. Right? So that's not going to cause me to say a bracha on it in a situation where it's a suffix. And so therefore the Bach says I would say both Vayomer and Emes V'Yatziv. The Shaag's Aryeh says I would only say Vayomer and I would not say Emes V'Yatziv. As opposed to the evening, the Shaag's Aryeh says that you would do the other way around. You would say Emes V'Emuna and you wouldn't say Vayomer. Why is that? Because Vayomer, the main takana of Vayomer, we said, is the way the Shaag's Aryeh understands, is because of the tzitzis. Tzitzis doesn't apply at night, and therefore, as we saw in the Gemara, you don't really have a chiyuv to say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema at night. It's just a minhag which developed from the fact that if you start saying it, you have to finish, and there was a minhag in some places to start saying it, or at least what they thought wasn't considered to start saying it, but if we would follow that minhag, we would consider like we started saying it, if you remember that Gemara that we saw in the previous year. So, but be'etzem, there's no chiyuv to say the third paragraph of Kriya Shema, Vayomer. And therefore, if I have a suffix, whether I said Vayomer and Emes V'Emuna is definitely more important in the evening. Another reason why it would be more important to say Emes V'Emuna is because you get the svara of the first explanation of Tosos. If I have this general suffix, I'm not 100% sure what I said. If I say Emes V'Emuna, I have that possibility that I said everything properly, because my part of my suffix is I may have already said Vayomer and not Emes V'Emuna. We're talking about the evening, Emes V'Emuna. So therefore, it's preferable to say Emes V'Emuna because I get that possibility. If I would say Vayomer, then I wouldn't get a possibility of fixing everything up 100%, like we saw in the first explanation of Tosfos. He asks a question on himself from the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chaf. It's a Mishnah in Brachos Daf Chaf on the base, which we saw already quoted. We don't have it in the Maramakomos, but it was quoted in the Tosfos, and we've been discussing it the whole time. The Mishnah of the Balkari. The Balkari, we said, He's mahar belibo ve'inu mavarech lo v'nev al-achra. He thinks Kriya Shema, but not the brachos. It seems that he is doing this both in the day and the evening. The Mishnah doesn't say there's a different rule for the Balkari in the morning than the evening. It seems to give one halacha for both. So even in the evening, when he has a choice to be Yotzei the Yetzias Mitzrayim with Vayomer or with Emes Ve'amunah, it still seems that the Mishnah tells him to think Vayomer and not Emes Ve'amunah. So why is that? So he gives two possible explanations. One is, it could be the Mishnah is according to the Shita that there is no Chiyav Zechir Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, and you're really not going to be saying Vayomer or Emes Ve'amunah. All you're going to be saying is the first two paragraphs. And it says, the Balkari thinks Kriya Shema he thinks about Kriya Shema, thinks the words of Kriya Shema. So according to in the morning, that's all three paragraphs. The evening Kriya Shema is only two paragraphs. That's what he's going to think. Yetzias Mitzrayim he doesn't have to do at night. That's one explanation. Second explanation is the Mishnah could be according to the opinion that there's a chiv of tzitzis at night. That's a machlokes tanoim, whether you have to wear tzitzis at night. So there are shitas that you do have to. And it could be that Mishnah holds that you do, and therefore there's a maila of the Parsha Vayomer even at night. Now both of these explanations, he says, makes the Mishnah be not lahalacha, because we really hold that there is a chiv of Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, and we hold that there's no mitzvah of tzitzis at night. Right? So both of those explanations are not lahalacha. The Shagas Aryeh is not bothered by this at all, because even though we would like a stam Mishnah to be lahalacha, but he says this stam Mishnah is not lahalacha anyway, because we hold that a Balkari is allowed to say brachos and Kriya Shema. So the whole Mishnah is not lahalacha. So to say that one prat of it also is like a different shita, which is also not lahalacha, is not bothersome at all. He points out that there's a svara that you could maybe say that even though Emes Ve'amunah has a maila over Vayomer in the evening, Emes Ve'amunah has a maila over Vayomer, which is what he said, and therefore we should say he said we should say specifically Emes Ve'amunah and not Vayomer in the case of a suffix at night. He says maybe that maila doesn't really help us in the case of a suffix, because the whole reason I have to go back in the case of a suffix is because of suffix deraisa l'chumra. In the case of the Balkari, where I'm choosing which one to say, so I look at all the milas and I pick the one with the most milas. When it comes to which one to say because of my suffix, so Emes Ve'amunah has two things. It has the Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it has the fact that that's the Iker Takana. Right, the Birchas Kriya Shema was Misaki in order to be mitzvah, to be yotzei that mitzvah d'oraisa. That second aspect is only a d'Rabbanan. So since I'm dealing with a suffix d'Rabbanan l'kula, so I just can ignore that factor. I can ignore that maila, because it's only a maila if I really have to say it. But I have a suffix whether I have to say it. Maybe I already said it, and therefore that maila maybe doesn't exist at all. You could hear maybe a svara to say such a thing, in which case Vayomer and Emes Ve'amunah would be even. However, he says it's not true, because Shmuel said that in the case where I had the suffix of Emes V'yatziv, so I say Emes V'yatziv again, even though the nusach is not the Yeraisa of Emes V'yatziv, the nusach is for sure D'Rabbanan. So, just like I would say, right, if we would say this svara, which he's telling us not to say, but if I would think to say this svara, that in the case of a suffix, I take away any of the other milos, and I focus just on the suffix d'oraisa aspect, and the suffix d'oraisa aspect is the same. Vayomer is the same as Emes V'yatziv. So even if I didn't have Vayomer, and I was just looking at Emes V'yatziv has more than one component. It has a component where I mentioned Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it also has the entire nusach, which includes a bracha. I could be yotzei the chiyav d'oraisa without saying the bracha. So therefore, maybe I should just say the part about Yetzias Mitzrayim. The bracha is a suffix d'Rabbanan l'kula, so who gives me the right to say that bracha? So we see from there that it doesn't work that way. That we're looking at the whole unit together, and when I have a suffix d'oraisa, so now I do look at the entire unit, and I say, now I'm going to say Emes Ve'amunah, or Emes V'yatziv, in the case of the Gemara. I'm going to say the whole thing, including with all the d'Rabbanan aspects to it. So therefore, the same thing would apply when I'm trying to compare it to Vayomer. right? Which one has adifus? Even in a situation of a suffix, I'm going to look at also all of the milos derabanan that I get out of it as well, because we see that it all goes together. We don't drop one because of the other one. The last halacha that the Shagas Aryeh discusses is if he for sure said the entire Kriya Shema, and he's only a suffix on the emes v'emunah. So in this situation, the Shagas Aryeh says it's a suffix derabanan, and he would not have to go back and say emes v'yatziv or emes v'emunah, because as we pointed out, once you said bayomer, you're for sure yotze yechiv d'iraisa, so it becomes a suffix derabanan, and you wouldn't have to go back. So that takes care of all the sfeikos. We just run through them quickly one more time. If he has a suffix, whether you said Kriya Shema at all, so he has to say the whole thing, because it's a suffix d'iraisa. And once you're saying the whole thing is a suffix d'iraisa, you have to say the brachos also. That's the Psak Shagas Aryeh Rambam. In a situation where he for sure said the first two paragraphs, he has a suffix about Vayomer and emes v'yatziv or emes v'emunah, so the Bach says he has to say both together. The Shagas Aryeh says you only have to say one of the two, but it makes a difference whether it's the nighttime or the daytime. In the daytime, it's better to say Vayomer, because that it was Iker Nisaki during the day, also because of the Parsha of Sissus, so you get more out of that than emes v'yatziv. But in the evening, emes v'emunah is more important, because Vayomer loses all of its milos, because it's a daytime mitzvah, and emes v'emunah takes on a greater importance. And the situation where he for sure said the whole Kriya Shema and his suffix is only on the emes v'emunah or emes v'yatziv, in that situation, he's patur because of a suffix d'Rabbanan.